welcome to episode 2 of a TrueSoulWakes.com video and podcast. And do we have an unexpected development announced in the UK this evening? You'll be getting some info on what Theresa stands for, so if you don't know much about her, it's worth listening to, even if you're not from the UK, for reasons that will become evident. The title of the episode this evening is A New Prime Minister, but Is the Choice to be Celebrated? The date is the 11th of July 2016. I hope you're all well and this finds you safely. Let's begin. Theresa May has been chosen to become the UK's next PM, as Prime Minister. She'll take office as the leader of the UK and the Conservative Party on Wednesday the 13th of July. David Cameron will be at number 10 packing his bags as we speak, and Theresa will already have her assistant filling in the expenses claim forms to cover everything from the new church donations to a good clean of the duck pond out the back. Joking aside though, a woman for only the second time is to be in charge, at least officially, in the UK. Although the UK doesn't have the same executive position like the US president, she will still command a lot of influence, have the nuclear football in tow, and have more media attention than ever before in her new role. The Queen, of course, has the ultimate power in the UK, at least by law, but it is tradition that the Queen chooses not to use her powers, which include being able to seize any piece of land anywhere in the Commonwealth for herself at will. So we can join in on the celebrations that a female will once again be running the country, knowing she will have a hard time to live up to the achievements of her female predecessor, Margaret Thatcher, who incidentally I met as a young child while walking on some hills when I was living near London, aged around 6. Thatcher was arguably achieved many things and was also the most divisive Prime Minister in our country's living memory. The miners' strikes, the riots associated with them, the lines of police in riot gear, the working classes on the other half, and regular clashes. She ruled with an iron fist and survived an assassination attempt that very nearly killed her. Under doctors' orders to rest after the bomb blast, she refused and was determined to get out in front of the TV cameras to let everybody see and hear she was okay, and that fear was not a word that she had in her vocabulary. People either liked her or loathed her. Again, she was divisive. So we can rest assured, therefore, that Theresa May can't possibly be as bad, can't we? Or can we? May's been a Tory MP since 1997. She's been on the front bench since 2010, where she served as the Home Office Secretary, which is like the police for the UK. She came to light big time when she tried to deport 2 foreign men at the time, who were both found guilty of terror-related offences, but she was prevented from doing so in a timely fashion, being overruled by the European Court of Human Rights. It was at that point she began her dislike towards the Human Rights Act, and it's here we can begin our review of May, based on her recorded voting patterns in her time as MP. Her argument for wanting to get rid of the Human Rights Act, which protects every living person in the country, and indeed the world, for those countries signed up to the Act, was that it prevented her from deporting a handful of known terrorists from the UK. Let's examine the Rights Act in more detail, and it'll help build up a picture of somebody who would even want to abolish it. The Human Rights Act is quite simple, and it has some basic rights that apply to every single person in the UK, and like I said, other countries signed up to it. This is irrespective if you're an ordinary civilian, if you're a prisoner, if you're in the army, anything. It applies to everybody. So you have the right to life, and that's protected by law. The state is required to investigate suspicious deaths and deaths in custody. There's a ban on physical torture and inhumane treatment. There's protection against slavery and forced labour. There's the right to liberty and freedom, which means you've got the right to be free, and only the state is allowed to imprison you, and only then with very good reason, for example if you're committed of a serious crime. You have the right to a fair trial, and no punishment without law. You are innocent until proven guilty. You are respected for privacy and family life, and you have the right to marry. It protects against unnecessary surveillance or intrusion into your life, and you have the right to raise a family. You have the freedom of thought, religion and belief. You can believe what you like, practice your religion or beliefs so long as it doesn't interfere with others against their will. You have the right to free speech, peaceful protest, and you have the right to speak freely, join with others peacefully to express your views. Discrimination is banned, and everyone's rights are supposed to be equal. You should not be treated unfairly because of your gender, race, sexuality, religion, or age, etc. You also have the right to protection of property and the right to an education and the right to free elections. It protects against state interference with your possessions and means that no child can be denied an education and that all elections must be open, free and fair. And that's it. So why would you want to get something rid of like that? Seems like very basic rights. I mean, it doesn't even mention food on here or water. I mean, these are... Anyway. So she decided she didn't want this Human Rights Act anymore because there was a handful, and I literally mean a handful, of foreign-born people that were charged with terror offences. May wanted to get rid of these people, and because the European Court of Rights overruled her, she decided, right, let's get rid of these human rights. Anyway, this may just be a one-off because she was Home Secretary, so let's take a look at her other rights. So these are her votes to do with equality and human rights. I could list the date of all of these, but it will drag it out too long. So, in 2013, Theresa May voted to remove the duty on the Commission for Equality and Human Rights to work to support the development of a society where people's ability to achieve their potential is not limited by prejudice or discrimination, and there is respect for human rights. So she voted to remove that duty. Again, 2013, Theresa voted against making it illegal to discriminate on the basis of caste. So this is not racial caste, this is social status in society. It's the sort of discrimination that you get in India between, those with qualifications and those who do well and those who are maybe from the poorer parts of town or have fewer qualifications. They take it very, very seriously in India. And again, she voted against making it illegal to discriminate based on that. 2014, she was absent, and she's absent from an awful lot of these votes, and so I shan't keep saying it, but I'd say at least 40% of these votes she's absent for. On the 26th of May, Theresa voted in favour of repealing, that means abolishing, the Human Rights Act in 1998, against plans to save the steel industry facing fast-track infrastructure projects requiring large amounts of steel, and against a principle of the government not borrowing to fund day-to-day spending. So essentially, she wants to get rid of the Human Rights Act, and she doesn't want to bring forward spending plans to try and save the steel industry. Here comes the military votes. Theresa May almost always voted in favour of use of UK military forces in combat operations overseas. In 2003, she voted against, saying the case for war in Iraq has not been established. In other words, on the 18th of March 2003, she was all for war in Iraq, and she was convinced they were justified going in. On the same day, she also voted that the government use all means necessary to ensure the disarmament of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, which led to the UK joining the US invasion of Iraq 2 days later. Now, Shilcott reports just come out recently, and it makes clear not only were there no weapons of mass destruction, which we already know, but they were told they weren't. They were also told that invading Iraq would increase the security risk in the UK. Now, this isn't subsequent advice that came out years later stating the obvious. This is advice that was given to them before. And although she wasn't leader then, it was Tony Blair, she supported it, and she voted saying that they had enough evidence to go in. She voted to support the continued deployment of UK armed forces in Afghanistan. She voted to support the establishment of a no-fly zone in Libya. She voted for airstrikes in Iraq to support Iraqi defences against ISIS. She voted to support UK airstrikes against ISIS in Syria. And again on the 2nd of December last year, 2015, she voted to support airstrikes again. Now, Assad was voted in as president of Syria by his own people. He's not a dictator. I know our media calls him that, but he was voted in. And as far as he's concerned, he's got terrorists in his own country attacking him and his government. Now, he's trying to defeat them with his own army, and the best that we can come up with is to support the terrorists that are trying to kill him. And yet we call them moderate rebels. That's what we call them. That's what our media calls them. They're moderate rebels. Now flip this round the other way. If 1 million people decided to march on London and start attacking with small arms fire and that, do you not think that the government would defend itself with the army? But that's what's going on over there. And then the other countries abroad having a go, saying, oh, well, they're only moderate rebels. Anyway, who's funding these moderate rebels? And why they keep having the latest American weaponry is another matter. Anyway, her votes towards welfare and disability. 2012, she voted not to add proposed exclusions from the reduction in housing benefits due to being deemed to have excessive bedrooms. What this means is that in 2012, they decided to have a benefit cut for anybody who had one more bedroom than the government deemed you needed. So if you were a couple living together, you were deemed as needing one bedroom. And if you had two, the government would give you a charge, or a bedroom tax as it became known, irrespective of the rent that you were paying. And there was this proposed exclusion that if you were disabled and therefore would need a wheelchair or a carer staying over, that you would be allowed one extra room, so one for yourself and then one for your disability equipment or for the carer to stay. Now, she voted against that, so she was basically trying to make disabled people pay even more. In October, she then voted to introduce this, and for all working age claimants, now by working age it means anybody who's aged 18 to 65 who is disabled or not. On the 12th of November 2013, she voted again towards reducing housing benefit to more people deemed to have excess bedrooms. On the 26th, she voted to keep the penalty for social tenants deemed to have excess bedrooms, against freezing energy bills and against measures to help increase the amount of money given to people in Wales. So not only has she voted for reducing the benefit of disabled people who require an extra bedroom to store some things, but when this was brought up and debated, she voted to keep the penalty for these disabled people, and then she voted against freezing the energy bills. So she was saying, screw the poor people who are disabled, we're going to penalise them, and as for the energy companies, let them charge what they want, I don't mind. Crazy. This was then voted on again in December for some reason, and she voted again the same way. She voted in favour of housing benefit penalties. On the 8th of January 2013, she voted in favour of capping any increase in working age benefits and tax credits to only 1% rather than allowing them to increase in line with inflation, which was 2.2%. So she's voting for the poorest people in society who are relying on benefits to receive a real terms cut by 1.2% in 2013. She then also voted to cap discretionary working age benefits and tax credits to 1% in the year 2014 and 2015 and 2016. Although in 2016 it was subsequently reduced to 0, not even 1%. So she's all for the poor people being made poorer. It says here that she's voted for this across the board on benefits, so whether it's unemployment benefits, whether it's disability benefits, whether it's single mother or single parent household benefits, irrelevant, all of them 1%. Excluded, of course, are pensions that are triple locked. So the pensions go up by a minimum of 3% or inflation, or the consumer price index or the retail price index, about two different kinds of inflation, or 3%. Whichever is the higher, they will go by. So she's voting for the pensioners to be protected, but for disabled people who never had a chance to begin with, she's not. Here are the votes about paying higher benefits over long periods for those unable to work due to illness or disability. She voted against those who have been ill or disabled since their youth receiving a certain benefit on the same basis as if they had made sufficient national insurance contributions to qualify for the allowance. So she thinks that if you were ill since being a child, you don't deserve this contribution that you would get if you were an adult and then became ill. She voted not to increase the amount of time people can receive the sickness benefit from 1 year to 2 years. So people have the benefit for 1 year, and if they don't get better, that's it, finish. Unless, of course, you have no savings. But if you've worked and saved, and then you get ill, you've got 1 year of benefits, and then that's it. It used to be that you had it for as long as you needed, but she's one of the people who vote for that to come to an end, and for it to continue to be at an end. She voted not to make an exception for people with cancer or undergoing cancer treatment from the 1 year limit. So it doesn't matter if you're dying of cancer or any other disease, or you've got a horrific illness, this lady does not want you getting a day more benefit than 1 year. Theresa May also voted to remove the work-related activity component from the sickness benefit. That means that in the UK there's basically two types of sickness benefit. There's one kind where they think, oh, you've got a chance with a bit of help, you might be able to do this activity or that and work towards getting better. And then there's the other group, which is that they don't think you would be able to get better even with help and support. And that group is called the support group, i.e. they don't think you can get better. And the other group is called the work-related group, and she's voted to get rid of that altogether. So that would mean that everybody who's too ill to work but who's not completely written off, she doesn't think are entitled to any benefits. So what you're supposed to do if you're too ill to work, I can't see any employer wanting to employ you. She thinks you deserve no money. And she's also voted to remove the limited capability for work element of universal credit. That is the exact same thing, but from universal credit, which is due to replace employment and support allowance at some point in the future. So she's very anti-disability. Here's some votes with regards to local councils. On the 10th of January 2012, Theresa May voted to allow councils to retain a proportion of the business rates generated in their area to localise assisting those in financial need and to help pay their council tax. Well, that's nice, because out of the last however many votes she's made, she's finally made one that actually would benefit people who are struggling to pay. Here's some more votes that she's done with regards to welfare benefits in general as opposed to the disability ones. 2011, she voted against introducing a childcare element to universal credit. So that means if you're on some kind of benefit, for instance, you can't work, but you have a young child, she thinks that you should not get any extra money for that young child. Now, some people may agree with that. I say it's very unfair on the child in question, who has nothing to do with the fact that his mum and or dad are ill, and this child is now going to be made to suffer for the first 16 to 18 years of its life, and it won't be getting very much for Christmas, and it'll be living in a cold home. She voted against a proposal to exclude £50,000 from an ISA when the assessment of capital is used to find out if somebody is eligible for universal credit. So in other words, if you've got whatever the figure is up to £50,000, she has voted that you do not deserve any benefit of any kind. So, moral of the story, if you get sick in the UK, blow all your money straight away, because otherwise you won't get any money anyway. So you might as well blow it and then get your money, and then at least you've had something for your savings that you've put away, because otherwise you're just going to spend slowly and buy what you need, and then you're going to get that anyway. You might as well not have saved. I say go on holiday if that's would ever happen to you here. I'm sorry I'm going a bit slow here, but I'm trying to make a thorough job of this to build up a picture of what this lady's like. February 2012, she voted not to exclude child benefit from the benefit cap. The benefit cap was brought in response, well, obviously the financial crisis, but they were looking for scapegoats. It obviously couldn't be themselves or the bankers, so it had to be, it was partially blamed on the bankers, but nobody got into any trouble apart from one guy. It had to be then shifted towards these families that had lots of children and were claiming lots of benefits. Again, she's decided that child benefit should count towards this cap. I think they set it at £20,000 a year for the whole house. So if you're in a family that's got lots of children, maybe lots of brothers and sisters, and your mum and dad are on low income, either they've got a job but not a very good one, or they're on benefits, tough luck for you. You won't be getting very much for Christmas this year. She also voted against the universal credit payment being related to disabled children and young people. Well, that's disgusting, because disabled people and children and pensioners, the whole lot, they're all people obviously, have extra costs due to their disability. Sometimes they're more obvious than others, like a wheelchair. Sometimes they're less obvious. And she thinks that they don't deserve extra costs, and she's voted against giving them extra costs. Well, if you're a family that's struggling anyway, and then you're bringing into the world a disabled child, this lady is against giving you any extra help compared to the next child. Now that is very unfortunate because quite often parents have to take time off work or give up work completely because of a disabled child. Just looking through. On the 8th of January 2013, May voted to cap any discretionary working age benefit and tax credits at 1%. So we're not talking about the standard benefits here, we're talking about discretionary benefits. Now, these came about that in London, where the rents are extortionate, they brought in these caps on the most amount of rent that they would ever pay. And obviously it flushed, let's say, the undesirables out of the city. I mean, that's not the official way that they put it, but that's how people saw it. The people that they maybe didn't want living next door all of a sudden couldn't afford it because of this cap, and they all had to move. But what was different or difficult for some people was, let's say, if you're disabled and you have an adapted home with a ramp maybe, or a lift or a stair lift, that kind of thing, they were given this discretionary fund that they could apply for, and it was pathetically small anyway. It equated to something like 25 pence per person per year on average, so you were very lucky if you even applied for it, and she was on about capping that to 1% increase. She voted for all the benefits, payments and tax credits to be capped at 1%. Again, pensions were excluded, they got the full rate. Child benefit and all that was included though. She voted in favour of reducing housing benefit for those deemed to have excess bedrooms. She voted in favour of reduction of housing benefit for those tenants who were claiming for very cheap properties, which was counterproductive in my opinion, because that encouraged claimants to deliberately get a really cheap rent, and then what they were allowed to keep was half of the difference of the average. Well, that encouraged people who were very poor anyway to go into even cheaper properties because they got to keep a little bit of the difference that the government was saving. If they're not allowed to keep anything, they might as well get the full rate. On the 4th of June 2015, Theresa May voted in favour of spending cuts and changes to the welfare system that would see a £30 billion annual cut for working age benefits in favour of spending the money on the new Trident nuclear weapons submarine system. On 20th of July 2015, she voted to reduce the household benefit cap, freeze the rate of many working age benefits, reduce rents in England and the social benefits paid, and for other changes to the benefit system that would reduce the number of claimants that would qualify for help. Of course, they dress it all up as empowering people, and people are trapped on benefits and this. Well, people are trapped on benefits when they're disabled lifelong. People are trapped on benefits when they can't find any work in their area because there is none. Why is there no work? Well, people haven't got enough money to buy things anymore. So if they're not buying things, shops aren't selling things, factories aren't building things. So there's no work, it's obvious. And if you cut off money to the very people who are going to spend it the most likely because they're hand to mouth, it's not like people on benefits are saving thousands of pounds. It's hand to mouth. So if you're taking money away from people who would spend it within days of receiving it, you're only going to hurt the own economy, especially if you pass that cut on to the very rich people who have millions if not billions in the bank. It's not like the rich people think, oh, I've got an extra £20 this week, I'm going to spend it. But to the poorest people in society, that £20 will get spent, and then it will go back round through the system, and it'll give a shopkeeper an extra job, it'll give the factory an extra job, the tax receipts will go up, productivity will go up. Why they don't see it like this, I don't know. To me, that's basic. Unless I'm really missing something obvious. It's not going to do much good sat in a billionaire's bank account earning next to zero interest. Isn't that 20 quid a week? On the 27th of October 2015, Theresa May voted in favour of reducing the number of people that qualified to receive tax credits. This was done by adjusting the amount of hours that you had to work to claim them, and then reducing the amount of money that you could earn before claiming the tax credits. So, It was forcing you to work more hours before you could claim, but also forcing you to earn less money before you could claim. And actually doing the math, it worked out that if you were even more than about 10 pence above minimum wage, you would earn too much to qualify for anything. But if you worked any less, you didn't work enough hours to qualify. So for the sake of earning 10 or 20 extra pence an hour, you lost hundreds of pounds a week. And this resulted in people going to their employers, who were maybe 50p over the limit, asking their employer for a wage cut so that they would qualify for this help that was worth far more than the 50 pence that they were getting by doing the work. Ridiculous. They don't think these things through sometimes. Again, she's supported to remove the work-related groups, so the people who were disabled who were deemed almost capable of doing something. She wants rid of that benefit altogether. On the 18th of November 2015, Theresa May voted for proposed cuts to tax credits and against investment aimed at growing a productive economy focused on science, technology and green jobs. So she's voted against both of those things. On the 6th of January this year, she's voted in favour of cutting universal credit benefits for many people who are in paid employment. So what happens in the UK is that if you are in a job but the job doesn't pay very well, not enough to live on, there's a minimum amount that the law says you need to live on in this country, and if you don't receive that amount but you are in work, they will top up your money. So it obviously only affects the people who are on very low wages, and she's voted in favour of cutting that benefit. So again, the poorest people, in this case working people, are made to pay. And then they say, oh well, we're going to cut the amount of tax you have to pay. So what happens is, the guy working 40-hour week is paying £2 a week less in tax, yippee, and then losing 50 quid a week in his tax credit. He's working the same amount of hardness, and when he complains about his 50 quid, he's just told, well, you're saving £2 a week in tax. On the 26th of May 2016, so only about 6 weeks ago, Theresa May voted again in favour of repealing or abolishing the Human Rights Act of 1998. Here's some votes on spending public money to create guaranteed jobs for young people who have spent a long time unemployed. She voted against creating more jobs for young people that are guaranteed, funded by bankers' bonuses, and making planned investments sooner, reducing VAT, which is value-added tax, and a tax break for small firms taking on extra workers. She voted against a lot of that. So she's against small firms taking on extra workers. She's against creating guaranteed jobs for young people. And she's against reducing VAT on goods, which would make them cheaper for the ordinary people to buy. And she only voted against it because it was going to be funded by bankers' bonuses. So the people who are already earning telephone figure salaries and then getting over twice as much in bonuses were going to be taxed their bonus to help pay for the plebs or the poor people who can't get a job to try and get a job, or for small firms who were struggling to afford to hire new people, give them a tax break. No, she would rather her mates get the bank bonuses. She voted against a package of economic policies which included bringing forward long-term infrastructure investment, building 100,000 new affordable homes, and guaranteeing jobs for the long-term unemployed. She voted against the lot. So when she says she's trying to help working families or people struggling to get work, she's a liar because she's voting against it. How can you vote against something like that? Alright, bringing forward long-term infrastructure investment. I mean, that sounds like it would be helpful if the economy is suffering today, but it could also mean that there's less work for tomorrow. But you can build 100,000 affordable homes, and you can give jobs for the long-term unemployed guaranteed. And by jobs, I don't mean they're forced to sweep the streets for £8 a day, £1 an hour slave wage. I'm talking proper jobs that are at least minimum wage, guaranteed. Doesn't matter what they do as long as they're doing something. Ideally, producing something that can be sold. But if they can't because there's no demand, well, at the very least get them doing something useful. But no, she's against it. She voted against calling on the government to get more people into work, bringing forward investment and introducing a jobs guarantee. She was against reintroducing a 10% rate of income tax paid for by a mansion tax, to act on rip-off rail fares, soaring energy costs, and to stand up for families in the private rented sector, to reform pensions, curb payday lenders, reform banking, planning and the skills system. She was against all of that. Every single one of those things she was against. The mansion tax was an idea floated in the UK where any property that was worth £2 million or more, the owner of that property would have to pay a fraction of the value of their property in a mansion tax. Now, they never decided on the rate or anything because they aborted it. Their reason for aborting it was this old granny syndrome reason where, well, what if you've got an old lady who bought the house 50 years ago, she doesn't have very much money, and now she happens to be living in this house worth millions but has got no money. And because of that one reason, the whole thing was abolished. Well, on the surface, that was the reason. We all know the real reason. The real reason is that all these people live in houses like that and they don't want to have to pay anything. So, again, they're totally against making the rich pay any more. In fact, they're cutting what they've got to pay. But making the people who can least afford it, the disabled, pay more. The low-paid workers pay more. The single-parent families, they've got to get less. Bankers' bonus tax. She voted against Labour's proposals to reduce the deficit and to cut VAT to 17.5% by repeating the bank bonus tax. She was also against creating 100,000 jobs explicitly for young people by helping them and training them to build 25,000 new affordable homes. She was against it all because it would repeat the bankers' bonus tax. Mysteriously, Theresa May was absent on the other 9 days, spread randomly across 16 months, to do with bankers' bonuses and their tax. She didn't attend and didn't vote. So out of 11 votes to do with the bankers' bonuses tax, she voted on 2 of them, the 22nd of June and the 12th of October 2011. And both times she said, no, we're not going to tax these bonuses that are often run into the millions. We're going to leave them alone. But I'll tell you who can pay. The young who've got no jobs, the people who can't afford to buy new things because of the VAT. And as regards to people who don't have a home, well, it's all right, Jack, because I've got one, so tough. And there is the small fact that if you build 100,000 affordable homes, doesn't matter as long as they're evenly spaced throughout the country in somewhere, what's it going to do to the land value and the value of the other homes? Well, if you've got 100,000 new houses, that's going to increase supply in the market. What happens when supply goes up? Well, demand goes down, even just by a bit, but it'll go down. What happens when supply goes up and demand goes down? That's right, house prices come down. House prices come down. And why can't she have that? Well, personally, she might lose some, but more importantly, George Osborne, the financial chancellor, uses the prices of houses and the fact that their value is increasing in the UK because there's a shortage as gross domestic product. We don't produce anything in the UK anymore. All the cars, planes, trains, steam trains, that we used to make. All these aircraft companies, several car companies, Sheffield Steel amongst others, cotton mills long gone, fishing industries mainly been given away through the EU. We've got nothing left manufacturing-wise. So the only way that George Osborne can fudge the figures to make it look like we're doing okay is to keep encouraging the house prices to go up. How does he do that? Well, by discouraging building new ones, by pumping money into the banking system to lend mortgages, and when they stopped lending, the government came out with a scheme for government-backed mortgages. He's thinking of every trick in the book to try and keep the value of house prices going up, which are in a huge bubble again. But he doesn't care as long as it doesn't crash on his watch because it counts as GDP. And as Chancellor, he can ignore all that, providing it doesn't fall apart, and say, look how great I'm doing. Look how much the UK is producing. It's producing diddly squat. It's just the value of the houses going up, and he can count it in the same way as though we were producing cars. It's ridiculous. On the 5th of November 2012, she voted for allowing the employers to exchange employment rights for shares in the very company they work for. She voted for new employment status of the employee shareholder, holders of which may be exempted from certain statutory employment rights. Well, that's nice, isn't it? So they're trying to trick you, so people who aren't earning very much anyway would leap at the chance to get some shares for nothing because they're desperate for money. And then once they've got those shares, got you, you're no longer entitled to statutory employment rights. That makes it easier for them to get rid of you or not pay you when you're sick or, what. Don't matter what they do. If you're giving up your rights for a few quid because you need those quid, it's all a con. And she voted for that. She's voted for trade union activity and that. She voted for the appointment of a picket supervisor and for them to be identified to and contactable by the police at all times. She voted for trade unions to require minimum 50% turnout in order to make the strike ballot valid, and for other increased regulation around the trade union activities. So in other words, she's both these votes, which cover 3 different things, and more. She's made it far more difficult to strike. Well, why do trade unions strike? It's because the workers have been treated unfairly. So she's trying to abolish this, or at least make it far more difficult. It seems that she's encouraging unfairness at work, for low-paid workers, for disabled people, for single mums, single dads. In fact, anybody who's not in the top 10% seems to be losing out. Now, I'll skip through these next things a bit quicker because this is already dragging on. How did Theresa May vote on business tax? Well, let's have a guess. She voted to reduce the rate of corporation tax. Of course she did. Why would she vote to reduce corporation tax? Again, we're not talking small independent companies down the road. We're talking big-time corporations. She's voting to reduce the tax. Now, their argument goes, and this is their argument, well, if we don't lower the tax, they'll only go elsewhere. Sorry, I don't think you'll have Tesco, BMW, Mercedes, Apple, Google, Facebook, all these big companies thinking they're going to abandon the British market because somebody's decided, instead of lowering their corporation tax, to either leave it the same or even raise it a bit. They flock here because they know they can make a fortune of British people. What's happening is those huge organisations, those huge international conglomerates are the ones who have all the money that do all the lobbying with these politicians, and they get them to do and say what they want because they've got millions to pay them with. And so I'll give you $1 million on the table if you give me a favourable decision, because it works both ways. The decision aids me because I pay less tax, and it also crushes or stifles my competition who are smaller because A, they can't keep up with all the rules and regulations, and B, they're not getting these huge corporation tax cuts that I do. Nice little scheme if you can get in on it. On the 13th of April 2016, so 2 or 3 months ago, she voted against implementing a series of proposals intended to reduce tax avoidance and evasion. So all her mates who are depositing money in the Cayman Islands and wherever else, they can sleep safe because the new Prime Minister is on your side. On the 19th of April, which was almost a week later, she voted against giving the Financial Conduct Authority and Prudential Regulation Authority duties to combat abusive tax avoidance arrangements, including by ascertaining and recording the beneficial ownership of trusts. So here she is voting against policies to help with tax evasion and tax avoidance. Remember, tax evasion's illegal. Tax avoidance is just morally wrong. She's against both of that, and she's voted against it. And she's also voted against giving the 2 organisations that help track this down, she's voted against giving them extra powers which would help them do their job better. So when she says, oh, we're looking about trying to repair the economy, no, they're not. They want more of the same. They want more debt, which is paid for by the poorer people, so the very few that are very rich can get more and more and have to pay less and less. And oh, by the way, you can avoid paying tax and you can hide it, both illegally and immorally. I'm all for you. Business certainly is open for Britain if you're in the 0.1 of the 0.1 of the 0.1 of the top 1%. By all means, come here if you're a billionaire. She'll look after you. Oh, and with regards to education, she consistently voted for raising England's undergraduate tuition fee to £9,000 a year. So yeah, it was £3,000 a year, and they decided in their infinite wisdom to save the country money that they would raise it to £9,000. Doesn't make no sense, of course, because to begin with, the country's got to lend out that money, and then if there aren't any jobs anyway, or the jobs are poor paying, the students aren't going to pay it back. So the government's basically tripled the amount of debt it is going to be in for every person it puts through university in terms of tuition fees. And she voted for that. I'd say it's got more to do with getting everybody into debt as soon as possible so your ass belongs to the bank. Right, let's whiz through these last lot. How she voted on Home Affairs. She voted for a stricter asylum, consistently voted against allowing ministers to intervene in the inquests that she held. She continually voted against introducing ID cards, but voted for the introduction of elected police and crime commissioners. She voted for requiring the mass retention of information about internet communications, phone calls, emails, text messages and all that, and she's voted for stronger enforcement of immigration laws. She voted against measures to prevent climate change, so that double negative there. She voted for climate change, it would seem. She voted for selling England's state-owned forests. I can't believe that. Well, I can actually. She voted for selling England forests that belongs to the government to private hands, be them companies or individuals. She's for that. In other words, her friends who are very rich can buy some nice forestry area. She voted for more taxes on plane tickets. She voted for the culling of badgers to tackle bovine tuberculosis. And she voted against regulation for fracking to extract shale gas. Against the regulation of it. What's fracking? We're told it's this harmless thing where they spray some water and hope the gas comes. No, it isn't. Look it up, people, if you don't know what it is. They're pumping thousands of chemicals, boiling it up with red hot water and pumping it down into the ground at terrific pressure to see what happens. It's causing tremors everywhere, and even if it doesn't cause a full-blown earthquake like it's not likely to do in the UK, water filters through these rocks over thousands of years. That's where we get most of our drinking water from the ground. And she's on about deregulating all these shale things that put all chemicals in. Fantastic. And we'll round up with some miscellaneous real quickly here. She's voted against the slowing the rise in rail tickets. Against slowing the rise. So she's all for it being more expensive. She voted for capping civil service redundancy payouts. So if you work for the government, she wants to cap what you can get. She voted against Labour's anti-terrorism laws. She voted against Labour's anti-terrorism laws, but she's voting for all her own. Two-faced, if ever I saw it. For the privatisation of Royal Mail. She voted to restrict how much legal aid could be paid and for what reasons. That's right. It used to be that you could get legal aid in this country if you were taken to court or for very few things such as a divorce or medical negligence and one or two other things. If you didn't have the ability to pay for yourself, you could ask and apply for help. She's got rid of all that, and it is got rid of already, but she voted for that as well. She's always voted to allow national security sensitive evidence to be put before secret courts in secret sessions that the media are banned from even reporting on. So the media can't even report that these things are taking place, never mind what's going on and who, why, where, when and what. But she's all for this secret stuff. Bearing in mind, that flies into the face of the human rights. No wonder she's trying to get rid of it. She wants the success fees paid to lawyers in no-win, no-fee cases. She has voted against placing restriction fees on tenants charged by letting agents. What's so wrong about having a limit on the fee that a letting agent can charge its tenant? I'll tell you why it's wrong. Because you can apply to rent somewhere and the letting agent will say, oh, we need to run a check on you. It's going to cost, I don't know, £200. All right, so you give them the £200 and then they come back to you a day later or whatever and say, oh, I'm sorry, but you failed the check. So what do you have? Well, you have nothing but your £200 down. And she voted against restricting the maximum fee. So that's it. There you have it. In my opinion, having tracked the politics both nationally and internationally for years now, both mainstream and, as of 2 years ago, the alternative news as well. To put this simply, Theresa May, by how she's voted over the last several years, it's unfortunate to see, but it's quite easy to understand as well. She's extremely pro-establishment. She's the status quo, a puppet of the mega corporations, and pro-0.1 of the 0.1 of the top 1%. The fact that she's openly against human rights, and even says so, speaks volumes. In fact, an argument erupted in the final days of her leadership contest with the only remaining rival, claiming that Theresa's not being a mother would make her less suitable for the job. After a media backlash, Andrea Leadsom withdrew her remarks and apologised. But in my opinion, it couldn't have been more true. Here we have a privileged woman with all the rights and qualities, intelligence, she's tough, gets what she wants. All sounds good on the surface. But as with most leaders, that means they'll sell out for some power. And that shows with her wanting to cut mega corporations' tax, wanting to make sure the bankers don't have to pay any tax on their outrageous bonuses. These bankers are getting bonuses that are 10 times what the average worker will get in a full year's employment. And that's just their bonus. It's brilliant because as a banker, you take these huge risks, and if you win, you get a massive bonus. And if you lose, the government, i.e. the taxpayers, bail you out. So heads you win, tails they lose. great job if you can get into it. And she's sold out and have made the average workers pay. She wants war and more war, paid for by slashing the benefits of the very people who can least afford it, those unable to find work, the disabled, the single parent household where they maybe don't work, where she has consistently voted to cut. There have been over £30 billion per annum per year of cuts that affect working age people who rely on benefits because they can't work. This isn't won't work, can't be arsed. This is can't work because they're too disabled. But that's fine. They can struggle even more because we've got some nuclear missiles to buy. We've got more wars to fight. The military-industrial complex. All that nonsense. She's voted for more student debt, less legal aid, no bank tax. She's against the £2 million plus mansions paying any kind of tax, but quite happy to take another 20 quid a week from those least able to afford it, in charges because they might have an extra bedroom to store the wheelchair and other disability-related equipment in. Under her as Home Secretary, police adopted kettling, court trials were held in secret, and members of the public can be held without charge indefinitely. You can see why this Human Rights Act stands in the way of her dreams, can't you? So I'm going to make a few predictions and leave it at that. She's going to further divide society, and the rich-poor poverty gap is going to accelerate to new highs every single day. The rich and the powerful, as well as the media that they control, will heap praise upon this woman and try to convince the rest of the population that austerity is good, benefits aren't required to go up as employers can provide the high-paying jobs. And for everybody else, there's trickle-down economics. This will mean the division within society will widen in other areas as well as social cohesion continues to decline. There'll be a tipping point when there's enough working-age adults today, saddled with so much debt, no money, no hope, no help available, realise that while computers are faster than ever before, and special effects in movies are better than ever before, the best days in terms of employment, housing and other future prospects are long gone. They were reserved for the baby boom generation, who are now have their pension schemes protected by the triple lock guarantees that are costing the very people who can often not even afford to pay for their own mortgage well over £110 billion a year, while in return they receive a paltry £5.4 billion in unemployment benefits. That's a ratio of over 20 to 1. And in addition, they receive the stigma to boot, all while having their benefits cut every single year since 2008. The senior executives who are now retiring, if not already, have long since exported most of the UK manufacturing jobs abroad in the last decade or two. Cars, planes, trains and most of the fishing, steel and coal all moved abroad to make an extra few pounds profit for those at the top and the shareholders, while not giving a second thought for the future generations who now have to somehow repay the £1 trillion in debt that have been racked up by this generation that's now retired, by becoming a banker, care worker, nurse, shop assistant or a teacher. Virtually every single job in the UK is a service industry job. There's very few jobs left where anything is actually made, built, manufactured and exported. Chancellor, as we mentioned earlier, has been desperately pulling off every trick in the book to try and mask the problem by inflating house prices to crazy levels that are unaffordable to almost everybody, to try and keep the UK's gross domestic produce looking healthy. But after round of money printing by the billions, subsidies for buyers who can't otherwise get mortgages, and turned in a blind eye to tax avoidance and money laundering as much as he possibly can, he's fast running out of tricks left in this book. It can only be a matter of time until the mass of disillusioned working-age adults of today, desperate for some stability, money, food, home, a job and other necessities in life, reach critical mass, realising the older generation had it all and left behind an unaffordable debt with little hope for future prospects for the many, all while watching the very people who they perceive caused this mess now live in relative comfort, paid for by an ever-increasing debt which has more than doubled since austerity began in 2008 and 9, which will be left for the current generation who have already been sold out to sort out. It was the same people who were told by the elites to stay in the EU, how globalism will be good for you, how cuts won't matter due to trickle-down economics, and how mass immigration will be great for the economy. And after one gyro check too many, those who have had nothing left to lose and no longer believe those who have everything and keep telling us we're all in it together, the haves are generally happy to stay in the EU. They want the status quo to continue. Why not? It served them well, and boy did they try and convince everyone else, through fear, war, racism and more, to keep it the way it's been. But critical mass is fast approaching. The masses have, for the first time in decades, said loud and clear, enough. We have nothing, no hope, no money, no job, no future, no security. We'd rather risk a future of uncertainty than have a guaranteed future with nothing for sure. And on that note, it's no secret that Theresa May has a very, very difficult job on her hands. She's got to hit the ground running this time. She's got to try and please her rich elite friends who are giving her the money and no doubt helped put her where she was. She's also got to keep the pensioners from voting her out because they've got the numbers. And at the same time, she's got to keep the masses, the working age adults of today, many of whom are living in poverty, from starting a revolution. And all this while the heat is building up to ever higher amounts in the Middle East. World War III, once unthinkable even just 10-15 years ago, now looks like it's more likely than it did in the 60s. I wish her good luck really, because I live in the UK and I don't want to see it fall apart, irrespective of what happened in the EU. Everything is going wrong. And on from that, I wish you a great evening, what's left of it, and enjoy the rest of the week. Take care, stay safe, keep uncovering the truth, try and think for yourself, question things when they don't make sense. Don't believe everything you hear just because somebody's in a suit when they tell you it, or that they're holding a piece of paper in front of the news. Question it. If you don't believe what I say, question it. Either ask me or look into Google, look it up yourself. You know, are the things that I said today true? Are they? Well, I know they are, but how do you know? You've just got my word. Look it up for yourself if you don't believe any of it. Anyway, on your way out, if you'd subscribe or leave a comment, I'd appreciate it. I'd like it if you liked it, if you did. And what would be really good is if you share this with somebody or your friends, if you got something positive out of it. And I really look forward to seeing and hearing from you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye. TrueSoulWakes.com